The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Celestial Garden, Seoul's most exclusive rooftop restaurant. Lightning fractured the sky, illuminating the glittering cityscape below. Inside, crystal chandeliers cast golden light over tables where Korea's most powerful men conducted business disguised as dinner. Kang Jae-min stood at the head table, champagne glass raised, his tailored black suit immaculate despite the storm raging outside. Every eye in the room fixed on him, not out of admiration, out of survival instinct. To loyalty, he said, his voice cutting through the murmured conversations like a blade. And to those who understand its price. 50 glasses rose in unison. He brought the crystal to his lips, tilted his head back and drank. Then he stumbled. The glass slipped from his fingers, shattering against marble. His hand clutched his throat. His eyes widened, pupils dilating as his body convulsed once, violently, before his knees buckled. Kang Jae-min, the man who controlled half of Seoul's underground empire, collapsed face-first onto the table. Chaos erupted instantly. Security guards drew weapons, shouting commands in Korean. Guests scrambled from their seats, some diving under tables, others frozen in terror. A red laser dot flickered across the rain-streaked window, then vanished. Bodyguards rushed toward the glass, guns trained on the darkness beyond. Sniper! Lock down every exit. Check the rooftops. Get him to the car now. But one person didn't scream, didn't run, didn't even flinch. Naomi stood near the kitchen entrance, tray still balanced on her palm, watching the pandemonium with unnatural calm. Her black server's uniform blended into the shadows, her dark hair pulled back tight, her expression unreadable. A guard grabbed her arm hard enough to bruise. What did you serve him? Champagne, she said quietly. From the bottle his lieutenant opened. Who are you? Just a waitress. The guard's grip tightened. Then how are you so calm? Naomi's eyes drifted to Kang's unconscious form being lifted by two bodyguards. Blood trickled from his nose. His breathing came in shallow gasps. Because he wasn't shot, she whispered. He was poisoned. The guard froze. How would you know that? She finally looked at him, and something in her gaze made the trained killer release her arm. Because, Naomi said softly, the poison wasn't meant for him. As they carried Kang toward the private elevator, his eyes fluttered open for just a fraction of a second. Through the haze of pain and approaching unconsciousness, his gaze found hers across the chaotic room. Recognition flashed in his eyes. He knew her face. And that changed everything. The elevator doors closed. The restaurant descended into lockdown. And Naomi stood perfectly still, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might shatter her ribs. Quick question before we go on. Where in the world are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. We love seeing how far these stories travel. And if you're enjoying this one so far, don't forget to like and subscribe. 12 hours earlier, her life had been completely different. The morning had started like every other morning in her shoebox apartment in Gangnam's forgotten district. No heat, no hope, just the familiar weight of bills she couldn't pay and a sister she couldn't save. Naomi had stood in front of the cracked bathroom mirror, pulling her hair back with practiced efficiency. At 26, she'd mastered the art of invisible. Plain features made plainer by exhaustion. Clothes chosen to disappear into crowds. A face people looked at and immediately forgot. Exactly what she needed to be. Her phone buzzed. A text from the staffing agency. Emergency shift. Celestial Garden. Tonight. Triple pay. She'd hesitated only a moment before replying yes. Triple pay meant another month of her sister Ruth's medication. Another month of keeping the machines running that kept her alive after the accident that had stolen everything from both of them. Another month of surviving. The restaurant had been a monument to excess when she'd arrived for the pre-shift briefing. Gold fixtures, imported marble, paintings worth more than her annual income hanging casually on walls. The kind of place where a single meal cost more than she earned in a week. You're covering Section 7, the floor manager had told her, barely glancing up from his tablet. VIP section. Do not engage in conversation. Do not make eye contact. Serve smile disappear. Understood. Understood. She'd been changing into her uniform in the staff room when the alley door opened. The man who entered wore an expensive suit and an expression that suggested he'd never been told no in his entire life. 30s maybe. Handsome in a way that felt manufactured. Cold eyes that calculated worth in fractions of seconds. He'd looked directly at her. Naomi Madhu? Her blood had gone cold. Nobody here knew her real name. I think you have the wrong person. I don't. He'd pulled an envelope from his jacket, placed it on the metal locker beside her. Inside is 50 million won. Half now. Half after. She hadn't touched it. After what? Tonight, a man will sit at table 7. His name is Park Dae-young. He'll order the 2005 Chateau Margaux. The man had smiled. You'll serve him this glass. He'd produced a small vial from his pocket. Clear liquid that caught the fluorescent light. Naomi's hands had trembled. I'm not a killer. You're a woman with a sister in critical care at Seoul National Hospital. A sister whose insurance ran out 2 weeks ago. A sister the hospital will disconnect from life support in 72 hours, unless someone pays her bill. He'd stepped closer. You're also a woman who accepted this shift the moment it was offered. Deep down you already knew what you'd have to do. I'll go to the police. And tell them what? That a stranger offered you money? I'll be gone in 60 seconds. But your sister won't be. Think carefully about who has more to lose. He'd placed the vial beside the envelope. Serve the glass to table 7. Then walk away. That's all. Your sister lives. You live. Everyone wins. He'd moved toward the door then paused. Oh, and Naomi? The man you're saving by doing this? He's killed more people than cancer. You'd actually be doing the world a favor. Then he'd vanished into the Seoul night. Naomi had stood there for 5 full minutes, staring at the vial and the envelope. 50 million won. Her sister's life. Her own soul. She'd opened the envelope. The bills had been real. She'd taken the vial. And hated herself for it. The restaurant had transformed as evening descended. The wealthy and powerful had arrived in armored cars and designer suits, their laughter echoing off marble as they pretended civilization still existed in rooms like these. Naomi had served drinks with mechanical precision, her mind numb, the vial burning like acid in her pocket. Then Kang Jae-min had entered. The entire atmosphere had shifted. Conversations died mid-sentence. Staff straightened like soldiers at attention. Even the ambient music seemed to lower in volume, as if the building itself recognized the presence of something dangerous. He hadn't been what she'd expected. The crime boss was younger than the myths suggested. Early 40s perhaps, with sharp features that spoke of intelligence rather than brutality. His movements were economical, controlled. He didn't swagger or demand attention. He simply existed, and reality bent around him accordingly. He'd walked directly to table 7. Naomi's table. She'd watched from the service station as his security detail swept the area, checked sightlines, positioned themselves at strategic points. His lieutenant Min-suk had tested every dish before it reached the table. Every glass had been inspected. Every bottle opened in front of him. These were men who understood that death could arrive in 1,000 disguises. She'd been preparing the wine service when their eyes had met for the first time. He'd been scanning the room with the detached awareness of a predator assessing territory. His gaze had passed over her, then returned. Stopped. For 3 heartbeats, Kang Jae-min had studied her face. Not with suspicion. With curiosity. Like he'd seen something unexpected and was trying to understand what it meant. Then Min-suk had said something, and the moment had broken. But Naomi's hands had been shaking so badly she'd nearly dropped the wine bottle. The Chateau Margaux, Min-suk had ordered when she'd approached their table. 2 glasses. This was it. The moment she'd been bought and paid for. She'd poured the first glass with steady hands, years of service work overriding her terror. Presented it to Min-suk for approval. He'd nodded. She'd placed it in front of Park Dae-young, the man in the expensive suit sitting to Kang's right. The target. Her hand had moved toward her pocket. The vial was right there. One quick motion. A few drops. Walk away. 50 million won. Jian lives. She'd hesitated. Kang had been watching her again. Not obviously. But she'd felt his attention like heat against her skin. You're new, he'd said quietly. Naomi had frozen. Yes, sir. First night. Nervous. A little. He'd studied her for another long moment, and something in his expression had softened. Just barely. Like a wall developing a hairline fracture. Be careful in places like this, he'd said. People aren't always what they seem. It hadn't been a threat. It had been a warning. And it had destroyed her resolve completely. In that moment, Naomi had made a choice that would alter the trajectory of both their lives. Instead of poisoning Park Dae-young's glass, she'd poured the wine for Kang clean. When she'd returned to the service station, she dumped the vial into a minor executive's glass 3 tables away. A man whose name she didn't know. A man who wasn't the target. A mistake. Except Kang had reached for the wrong glass. She'd watched in slow-motion horror as his hand had moved past his own wine, past Park's, and picked up the poisoned glass that had been meant for someone else entirely. Some cosmic accident of placement and timing. Their eyes had met one final time. She'd opened her mouth to stop him. Almost. But the words had caught in her throat, and Kang Jae-min had brought the glass to his lips and drank deeply. The poison had worked fast. Faster than she'd expected. His pupils had dilated. His breathing had changed. The glass had fallen. And Naomi had stood there, watching the most powerful crime lord in Seoul collapse, knowing she'd accidentally killed the one man who'd shown her kindness in this entire nightmare. The security response had been immediate and overwhelming. Every exit sealed. Every person detained. The restaurant had transformed into a crime scene in under 90 seconds. Naomi had been grabbed, searched, questioned. Her uniform had been checked for weapons. Her background run through databases. Every second of her evening scrutinized by men trained to extract truth through violence. But she'd kept her composure. Because panic now meant death. He's alive, Min-suk had announced, phone pressed to his ear. Barely. They're taking him to the private facility. But he's stable. Relief had flooded through her so intensely she'd nearly collapsed herself. Min-suk had turned to her. His expression carved from stone. You. Interrogation room. Now. They dragged her to a private dining room that had been cleared of furniture. Just a chair. A light. And Min-suk's burning fury. Who hired you? No one. He'd slammed his hand on the table. You're a temp worker who appeared tonight out of nowhere. My boss drinks wine you served and nearly dies. Tell me why I shouldn't put a bullet in your head right now. Naomi had taken a breath. Made her gamble. Because I wasn't trying to kill him. I was paid to poison Park Dae-young. 50 million won. Half in advance. She'd met his eyes. Someone gave me a vial this afternoon. Told me Park would order the Margot. I was supposed to put it in his glass and walk away. So why is my boss dying instead? Because I couldn't do it. I dumped the poison in a random glass and served Park clean wine. It was supposed to look like an accident. Some minor executive poisoned. Investigation goes nowhere. Her voice had cracked. Your boss took the wrong glass. I didn't want him to die. Min-suk had stared at her for a long moment. You expect me to believe that? I expect you to ask him. When he wakes up, he'll know I'm telling the truth. How? Because I tried to warn him. He'll remember. Min-suk's phone had buzzed. He'd answered, listened, his expression darkening. He's awake. And he's asking for the waitress. The private medical facility had been disguised as a luxury apartment building in Gangnam. Naomi had been transported in the back of an armored SUV, flanked by guards who'd looked at her like she was a bomb that might detonate at any moment. They'd brought her to a penthouse suite converted into a hospital room. Medical equipment beeped softly. 4 lines ran into Kang's arm. His face had been pale, but his eyes had been sharp. Alert. Alive. He'd looked at her as they'd positioned her in front of his bed. Everyone out, he'd said quietly. Sir, she. Out. Min-suk and the guards had retreated, leaving them alone. The silence had stretched between them like a blade. Finally Kang had spoken. You had the chance to end me. Why didn't you? Naomi had expected many questions. Not that one. She'd struggled for words. You warned me. About being careful. No one's done that in a very long time. So sentiment saved my life. Maybe. Or maybe. She'd met his gaze fully. Maybe you looked like someone who'd never been spared before. And I know what that feels like. Something had shifted in his expression. A wall cracking further. Neither have you, he'd said softly. She'd explained everything then. The man in the alley. The vial. Her sister. The impossible choice. The accidental glass swap. He'd listened without interruption, his eyes never leaving her face. When she'd finished, he'd been quiet for a long moment. Someone wanted Park dead and made it look like an attack on me, which means the betrayal came from inside my organization. He'd smiled, but it hadn't reached his eyes. You just became more valuable than any man in this building. What happens to me now? Kong had studied her. Not as prey. Not as a tool. As something he hadn't quite figured out yet. That depends. Can you identify the man who hired you? Yes. Would you be willing to help me find who ordered this? She'd thought of Ruth. Of the 50 million one that would disappear if she refused. Of the life she'd left behind that morning. What's in it for me? Your sister's medical bills paid in full. A job that doesn't involve poison. And my protection. He'd leaned forward slightly. In my world, that's worth more than money. And if I refuse? You walk out of here with enough cash to disappear. I'm many things, but I don't kill people for being unlucky. His gaze had held hers. But you won't refuse. How do you know? Because you're still here. Because you warned me even when it would have been safer not to. Because you're like me. He'd smiled again, and this time it had been genuine. You survive. She'd nodded. Okay. Good. Then let's find out who wants me dead. The next 72 hours had been a masterclass in how power actually worked. Naomi had sat in strategy sessions with men who controlled billions in illegal revenue. She'd identified the man from the alley through surveillance footage. A low-level facilitator named Choi who disappeared the moment Kong had survived. She'd remembered details others had missed. The way Choi had known her sister's hospital, her schedule, her exact financial situation. Someone had been watching her for weeks. Someone with resources. Kong had listened to every observation she'd made. His respect for her insights growing visibly. When his lieutenants had dismissed her theories, he'd silenced them with a look. She's the only one who tried to save me. I trust her judgment over yours. They'd found Choi 3 days later, hiding in a love motel in Busan. The interrogation had been brief and brutal. He'd given up his employer in under an hour. Park Daeng, the man who'd been sitting at table 7. The man Naomi had been hired to kill. It was a double cross, Kong had said quietly, studying the evidence laid out in his office. Park hired someone to poison himself, knowing I'd drink from the wrong glass. He gets to play the victim. I die. He takes control. Clever, Min-suk had muttered. Suicidal, Kong had corrected. Because now I know. Park's execution had been swift and public. A message to the organization. Betrayal had consequences. But it was what happened after that had changed everything. Kong had offered Naomi a position. Not as staff. As an advisor. Someone who saw patterns others missed. Someone who existed outside the traditional hierarchy and therefore couldn't be corrupted by it. She'd accepted. And discovered she was terrifyingly good at it. Within a month, she'd identified 3 more security vulnerabilities, restructured the distribution network to reduce exposure, and prevented 2 additional assassination attempts through simple observation and logic. The organization had started calling her the Ghost. Not because she was invisible anymore. Because she saw things others couldn't. But something else had been growing alongside her professional ascension. Something neither of them had named yet. It started with late-night strategy sessions that lasted until dawn. Kong asking her opinion on decisions that affected thousands of lives. Conversations that drifted from business to philosophy, from power to loneliness, from the weight of command to the price of survival. Do you ever regret it? She'd asked one night, exhaustion making her bold. The life you chose? He'd been quiet for a long time. Every day. And never. He'd looked at her. Power is a prison. But it's the only prison where you control the locks. That sounds lonely. It is. Profoundly. He'd smiled sadly. In my world, affection is a weakness. Caring about someone gives your enemies ammunition. So you learn not to care. You learn to be alone even in rooms full of people. She'd understood that more than he knew. Then stop living like you're already dead. The words had hung between them like a challenge. Kang had stepped closer. For a moment, the empire outside that office had ceased to exist. No organization. No enemies. No responsibilities. Just two people who'd accidentally saved each other. He hadn't touched her. But he hadn't stepped away either. You're dangerous, he'd said softly. So are you. I mean it. You make me want impossible things. Her heart had been pounding. Like what? Like tomorrow. Like trust. Like, he'd stopped himself. Like things men like me don't get to have. Maybe you've been asking the wrong people. Something in his expression had shifted then. A decision made. A line crossed. He'd raised his hand, hesitated, then gently touched her cheek. The tenderness in that gesture had shattered something inside her. If we do this, he'd whispered, there's no going back. My enemies will use you against me. Your life will never be simple again. You'll be a target forever. I stopped being simple the night I tried to poison Park Dae-young. Naomi. I'm not afraid of your world, Jaemin. I'm afraid of wasting my life being invisible. He kissed her then. Not urgently. Not desperately. With the careful certainty of a man who'd finally found something worth protecting. When they'd broken apart, she'd whispered against his lips. So what happens now? Now, he'd said, we rewrite the rules. 3 months later, the celestial garden reopened. The same crystal chandeliers. The same marble floors. But everything had changed. Naomi had arrived in a tailored black suit that cost more than her old apartment. Her hair styled, her presence commanding. Security guards who'd once shoved her against walls now bowed as she passed. She'd walked through the restaurant she'd once served in, and conversations had faltered. Eyes had followed. Whispers had rippled like waves. Because everyone knew now. The waitress who'd accidentally saved the crime boss. The woman who'd risen from invisibility to power in under a season. Kang's chosen. She'd felt his gaze before she'd seen him. That familiar weight of attention. She'd looked up, found him standing across the room, and something in her chest had constricted. He'd watched her the way he once watched enemies, measured, alert. But now there'd been something else beneath it. Pride. She'd held his gaze. Didn't look away. This time she'd owned it. Kang had moved through the crowd without hurrying. Every step had pulled attention. Every breath in the room had paused. The entire underworld had watched this unfold in real time. He'd stopped in front of her. Taken her hand. A scandal. A declaration. Then he'd leaned in and kissed her. Not hidden. Not apologetic. Public. Permanent. The room had frozen. In that moment everyone had understood. The waitress hadn't just survived. She'd been chosen. The private ceremony had happened 3 months after that kiss. Not a wedding. Something deeper. A binding recognized by the organization as unbreakable. A union that made her not just his partner, but his equal in the eyes of the empire they controlled together. The rooftop garden had been transformed into something beautiful and lethal. Silk banners moving in the wind. Torches casting shadows across the city skyline. No press. No civilians. Only Kang's inner circle. The men who'd once ruled beside him and now bent knee to both of them. Naomi had walked forward in black silk, and she'd felt the weight of their stares. Not judgment anymore. Respect. Fear. Recognition. Min-suk had stepped forward. His voice carrying across the assembled crowd. From this night forward, there is no separation between them. What threatens one threatens both. What honors one honors both. They stand unified. It hadn't been poetry. It had been law. Kang had taken her hands, and for the first time since she'd known him, he'd knelt, pressed his forehead to her knuckles, then risen, and kissed her. Slow, certain, unbreakable. The crowd had witnessed it in silence. Later, standing at the rooftop edge looking out over Seoul's glittering expanse, Naomi had felt Kang's presence beside her. Any regrets? He'd asked quietly. She'd thought about the scared waitress who'd entered this restaurant 6 months ago. The invisible woman who'd been willing to commit murder to save her sister. The girl who'd never been seen, never been chosen. Never been anything more than background noise in other people's stories. None, she'd said. Not a single one. He'd pulled her close, and she'd felt his lips against her temple. The night you were poisoned, she'd whispered. I stopped being invisible. 3 months later, the world learned my name. Not as a waitress. Not as a survivor. She'd turned in his arms to face him, but as the woman standing beside the most dangerous man alive. Partner, he'd corrected gently. Not beside. With. She'd smiled. With. They'd stood there as the city burned below them. 2 people who'd accidentally saved each other and deliberately chosen to stay. Not waiting for permission. Not apologizing for existing. Just standing. Together. Equal. Unbreakable. The waitress was gone. The queen had arrived. And the underworld would never forget her name. If you made it this far, thank you for watching this story of survival, transformation, and forbidden love. Hit that subscribe button to see more stories like this. Drop a comment telling me what you thought about Naomi's journey. And smash that like button for more interesting stories like this. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.